An Amazon search, fingernail scrapings, and a selfie. Tonight, we are going to look at three new pieces of evidence that have just become public in the past week in the murder case against Bryan Kohberger. Hi, everybody. Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. Tonight, we are going to be asking the question, is this new evidence likely to come in at trial? And if it is it about to sink Bryan Kohberger? We already knew that Bryan Kohberger's DNA was found on a knife sheath that was left at the scene. And that looked bad because 4 victims were all killed by stabbing, by a sharp instrument. Now it turns out that the state actually has evidence that Bryan Kohberger bought a knife that would have had the exact type of sheath found at the scene. At least that's what we're given to understand. It also turns out that there was more DNA at the scene, not just on the knife sheath. And the defense wants it out, but it's not clear whether they should. There was also DNA underneath one of the victim's fingernails, but it's not clear at all that it hurts Bryan Kohberger. And then finally for tonight, because there is much more that has come out in the last week, but this is what I figure we can cover in one night. There is a brand new selfie. Let's take a look at it, and we will be talking about this later. Is it creepy and disturbing, or is it just a nice selfie that a guy took maybe right before going to church to send his mom to prove he really was going? Does it tell a story about the crime, or is this just a photo documenting everyday life? We're going to be talking about all of this evidence tonight, and there is, as I said, much more. We're going to be talking about what it means for Bryan Kohberger. He is, of course, accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho college students, Xana Kernodle, her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, Maddie Mogen, and Kaylee Goncalves. So 3 women lived together in an off-campus house. Kaylee had recently moved out, but was back visiting. And the Idaho 4, meaning the 3 women and Xana's boyfriend, were all murdered in the house they lived in the middle of the night. 2 roommates were spared, and it seems one of them may have seen the killer and been able to identify his bushy eyebrows. That's going to be our next Kohberger video, I think. We're going to be talking about that evidence, but the selfie you just saw is part of that. So don't miss that next video. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you can come back for more, and hit the like button while you're at it. That'll really help the video. I'd appreciate it. So, and I want to say a special shout out to the first 5 in our chat tonight. We have Bama Queen, Sunrise, South Dakota, Olivia's mom, aka Sue, Loretta Powell, and Michael Lalonde. Special shout out to all of you, and welcome to everybody. So we're going to start tonight with the Amazon purchases. I'm going to pull this down just a little bit. There we go. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the knife sheath with Bryan Kohberger's DNA. It's without question the most important piece of evidence in the entire case. The DNA of the defendant found on something that could have housed the very murder weapon used in the crime, and it was found at the scene next to one of the bodies. It's critically important evidence for the state of Idaho. So we knew about this going all the way back to the time that Kohberger was arrested, when Brett Payne, the lead investigator for the Moscow Police Department, filed a statement along with a request for the court to issue an arrest warrant to take Bryan Kohberger into custody. And way back then, here is what was said. Let's go ahead and I'm going to add that back to the screen, and then take a look at Brett Payne's affidavit. And I'm going to go back to the beginning, a special section I wanted to put out for you. Okay, so there we go. Let's add this to the stage, and I'll make it a little bit bigger. It's hard for everyone to read, very much including me. Okay, so this is what Brett Payne said. He said, "As I entered this bedroom, I could see 2 females in the single bed in the room. Both Goncalves and Mogen were deceased with visible stab wounds. I also later noticed what appeared to be a tan leather knife sheath laying on the bed next to Mogen's right side when viewed from the door. The sheath was later processed and had K-bar, quotes, K-bar, and USMC, which I assume would be Marine Corps, and the United States Marine Corps Eagle Globe and anchor insignia stamped on the outside of it. The Idaho State Lab later located a single source of male DNA suspect profile left on the button snap of the knife sheath. So what this is saying is that at the scene, they found a very distinctive knife sheath. It had K-bar on it, and that was distinctive because it gave the exact manufacturer, but it also had USMC and United States Marine Corps Eagle Globe and anchor insignia. And most importantly of all, it had a direct match, according to the state, for Bryan Kohberger's DNA. It was left on the button snap of the knife sheath. That makes this a critically important piece of evidence. So in addition, so that is the first we heard about this DNA on the knife sheath. And so that part of it is not a surprise. We've known about that since he was arrested. But as it turns out, that is not the only evidence that connects that knife sheath to Bryan Kohberger, because we got brand new information, and there have been hints and rumors about this, but we got brand new information wrapped in what looked like it was going to be a really boring motion to exclude information about what Bryan Kohberger bought and what he clicked on at Amazon. But inside this motion is potentially bombshell evidence. So let's take a look at what the evidence is. We'll start with that. And it sounds like the state has two critical pieces of proof. Well, remember, law enforcement never found that murder weapon. They could tell what had happened to the students, but they never found the actual weapon itself. They did find the bodies. They found the knife sheath, but not the actual knife. And a K-bar knife sheath was what they found, but they didn't find any weapon. Once they arrested Kohberger, they searched the apartment where he had been living. They searched his car. They searched his parents' home, and everywhere they could think of where there might be this weapon, and they never found it. Now, did he possibly stash it somewhere? Did he dispose of it? Possible. But in any event, there is no knife that they're going to be able to present to the jury at trial, at least not as of right now. So I assume the prosecution is going to argue that Kohberger disposed of that knife, maybe even on the same night of the crime. We don't know. There was a long drive he took back when he went back to his apartment from the area around where the murders occurred. But using his Amazon activity, they were able to connect Bryan Kohberger to the exact type of knife that the sheath belonged to, because apparently he actually bought a K-bar knife on Amazon. Now, we're going from what's being said in these motions. We don't always have full information. I'm going to show you what we have and tell you how I pull out the inferences from that, and we will talk about that together. Mama Pinks missed Friday, but would like to say happy birthday to Miss Construe. Happy birthday, Miss Construe. We're glad to have you in tonight, and I hope you had a wonderful birthday. 18 again. That's exactly how old I am too. Jackie has been a member for 13 months. Woo! That's as much as we've had. So thank you, Jackie. I really appreciate it. And Sunset Gazing has been a member for 4 months. Thank you. And is asking about Dad. On Friday, we were going to do a video. Dad is turning 90. Well, he did turn 90. And we were going to do a video with all your questions for Dad. I mean, what would you want to ask a 90-year-old if you could? That was the theory behind it. But he got sick, so we had to put that off. But we're still going to do it, Sunset Gazing. He's definitely improved, but not quite back to normal. So we will get to that. Thank you for asking. I appreciate it. All right, so let's take a look at what we have. Let me add this to the screen, and I am going to be going back and forth between some documents. I'm going to start with this document. This is from the state, but you should know this is the state responding to the defense. But we're going to start here because we get some great facts here that are going to help us understand what everybody's arguing about. So this is about the K-bar knife, and here's what the state said. A K-bar knife, and I'll make it a little bit bigger. A K-bar knife sheath with a USMC logo was found next to one of the victims at 1122 King Road. The defendant's DNA was found on the K-bar knife sheath found on scene. Applying the test for relevancy, first, Kohberger's click activity, which shows a purchase of a K-bar knife and sheath before the homicides, makes it more probable than it would be without the evidence that the K-bar sheath found at the crime scene was Bryan Kohberger's. So the state is saying definitively they have proof that Bryan Kohberger bought a K-bar knife sheath. Now, they aren't as specific as I personally would like them to be about what it shows. For example, does it show the USMC logo on the side? That seems pretty distinctive, but they don't really mention that. I assume it does, or they wouldn't be using this. But I did have some questions around that. And then it says, second, Kohberger's click activity after the homicides makes it more probable than it would be without the evidence that Kohberger had a reason to search for a K-bar knife and sheath after the homicides. These facts are of consequence to determining whether Bryan Kohberger committed the homicides at 1122 King Road, the central question before the jury. And indeed, that is the central question, and this evidence is critically important. So what this is doing is linking him to the knife sheath by more than just DNA. At this point, it's linking it by his actual purchase of this very knife. And they're saying he bought it back in March of 2022. That's really interesting because that is 9 months before the murders took place. That is before he moved out to Idaho. So it's really fascinating to me that according to the search warrant, it says that they limited their request to Amazon to just a 10-day period in March. How did they know that Kohberger bought that knife exactly in that 10-day period? I really don't know. And they give us no clue here. I mean, did he post something on social media and forget he'd done that, which would be especially crazy given that he was a criminal justice PhD student? Or did a family or friend, family member, friend, did somebody remember him talking about this and tell them when it was? It's so specific, a 10-day period. If they had missed that window, they would have missed this entirely, but they were that specific. It doesn't seem like it could have been a gift because because they say they're looking at Kohberger's purchase history. So I'm just really curious about how they know that specifically. But when you think about what that could imply, why was he buying a knife at all? And why in March of 2022? Now, there's nothing illegal about buying a knife off Amazon. The question is why Bryan Kohberger was buying the knife, because these murders aren't going to happen for 9 more months. So was he thinking of killing someone in that period of time? Did he buy it for some completely independent reason that had nothing to do with these murders, even if he then went on to use it for this? We don't really know. If the state, though, can convince the jury that Kohberger was planning a murder 9 months in advance, that would be hugely important. The state is asking the jury to consider first-degree murder. That means there has to be not just there has to be pre-planning in this particular case. That would be very, very long-term pre-planning if he bought it 9 months in advance. It would also be relevant on whether or not the jury should impose the death penalty. Let me pull this out as we talk. Because if he bought this knife 9 months in advance without even a target, but with plans to just generally speaking murder somebody somewhere sometime, then that would make him incredibly dangerous. One of the factors for imposing the death penalty in Idaho, and the jury is going to be asked to look at aggravating factors. And one of them is that the defendant, by his conduct, whether such conduct was before, during, or after the commission of the murder at hand, has exhibited a propensity to commit murder, which will probably constitute a continuing threat to society. So they're obviously going to really want to push this. They're going to want to argue that this shows something about Kohberger and how dangerous he is, his propensity to commit murder. But at this stage, we don't really know why it is that he bought this. And the distance between when he bought it and when he used it, if he's the murderer, is a long one. So at that point, he presumably had never heard of the girls yet. He'd never even moved to Washington, where he was getting his PhD. And there would be, he moved, after all, from Pennsylvania all the way to the other side of the country, to Washington State. But why would he be at that point purchasing a knife? There are huge gaps in our information here, but we can see where the state is headed, which is suggesting that he bought this with the intent to murder somebody well beforehand, maybe not even knowing the target. And what the defense is going to say, the defense is going to say this was 9 months in advance. It isn't like he bought it to commit these crimes. He just bought this knife because he thought it was interesting. He thought it would be a great knife to have. There's nothing wrong or illegal about that. So you can see where the two arguments are going to come in over this knife. So there's another fact in there that I think is a real plus for the state and a real problem for Kohberger. Now, according to this brief, Kohberger was searching for another knife right around the time of the murders. And again, we're given less information than we would sure like to have. So let me add this to the screen and talk a little bit about what I see in this. So notice down here, it says that his click activity after the homicides makes it more probable that he had a reason to search for a K-bar knife and sheath after the homicides. And that's certainly true. But the period of time, let me see if I can find it here because it's not in this section. Let's pull up November. Oh gosh, 31. That's too many. What they told us in the course of talking about the knife sheath and their request to Amazon was that they asked for two specific times. They asked for, and here it is, it's in number 3. The state narrowly tailored a search warrant for evidence regarding the crimes of homicide or burglary. And then they did limitations to March 20 through March 30, 2022. And that was the one I thought, how on earth did they limit it to those 10 days? It seemed so random. And November 1, which is before the murders, through December 6, 2022, time right before and after the homicides. And they said, we didn't need to get everything. That's not relevant. We were trying to limit it. Be careful about that. In general, that's a great thing, but they limited it to before and after. They don't really tell us whether or not his search history showed he searched for a K-bar knife beforehand. But if in fact he was searching for another K-bar knife before the murders, then that's going to raise a question in the jurors' minds. Now, from the state's point of view, the state is going to say, yeah, that means he was looking for a knife because he knew he was about to use this one and he would have to get rid of it and he didn't want to be without it. On the other hand, Kohberger is going to say, if I'm searching for it, well, we'll get to that. But I think it'll help one of Kohberger's defenses in that case, and we'll get to it. So Kohberger already had a knife, right? He bought that from Amazon back in March. So why search for a new one? That's another question the jury is going to have to grapple with. And you can think of some reasons, like maybe he lost the first one, or maybe he sold the first one or loaned it to somebody. Maybe it was stolen from him. You can see each of those things being a possibility, but they come with some baked in problems for Bryan Kohberger. I mean, first of all, why wouldn't he just immediately say that? Oh, I sold that knife. I sold that knife on Craigslist 2 weeks ago, something like that. Why wouldn't he just say that? It would be so helpful for him. And then also for most of those things, you would expect there to be some kind of proof that would go along with it. Like if he sold it, you would think there might be a receipt. There might be an advertisement that could be proven that was on Craigslist or eBay or wherever. Maybe there would be some kind of evidence that he had sold it. If someone broke into his apartment or his car, stole the knife, again, you would think there would be some kind of report made to law enforcement. So there could be proof that, yeah, he had done something with that knife, not he, but someone had taken it from him. So it seems that he would, if he had anything remotely like that, he would be using that because it would be so helpful to him. So it seems pretty clear he must not have that because he would be using it. So overall, it's a potential enormous problem for Bryan Kohberger. The top choice of the defense so far has been to keep it out altogether. And more on that in just a minute. But there's still one way I think that they may be able to turn it to his advantage. We will talk about that in there because I think there's one key fact in there that could be helpful for the defense. We'll talk about that. So let's dive into how it is that Kohberger plans to turn this evidence around, at least from what we can tell so far. Bethany gifted 5 lawyerly memberships. Thank you, Bethany. I appreciate that so much. We will be having a members only meeting coming up probably next week. We're going to be having our associate level members meeting coming up later this week. I think you'll be getting a special email about that if you're at that level. And we are, of course, writing our true crime novel. So it was so much fun. We had a really great time. If you're a member and you had fun last time, put that in the chat. Tell everybody what fun it was because it was really great. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So we're talking about how Kohberger plans to turn this evidence around. And first and foremost, as I said, they'd like to keep it out entirely. And they argue, look, this whole Amazon search thing, this is all taken out of context. And now, mind you, this applies more to the searches for a new K-bar knife than to the sale, because the purchase or original sale to Kohberger of the knife just kind of is what it is. So let's take a look at the defense motion that was originally filed. And let me get that up on the screen. Oh, good. It is on the screen for you. Okay. So we are going to I have all these numbers. I'm moving all around, but we're going to be talking about what the defense said. In this ever-evolving age of technology, Amazon uses AI, artificial intelligence, to improve the customer experience by helping customers find products that match their interests and preferences. I'm going to skip around. It actively shapes user behavior through recommendations, paid advertisements, and algorithmic reinforcement. Amazon's use of AI began well before 2022, which is the first thought I had. AI, I mean, that's within the past year. So this is several years ago. I don't understand, but they're saying AI was being used by Amazon before any of this, before the murders occurred. Customer in the context of a household sharing an Amazon account is all members of the family sharing the account. In other words, the purchases, searches, and machine learning, ML, impact all of the users of the household Amazon account. Amazon's AI-driven system did not passively reflect user searches, but actively guided purchasing behavior based on predictive models. This means that a user's browsing and purchase history may not necessarily reflect deliberate intent, but could have been shaped by Amazon's algorithm. So they're arguing essentially that the searches may not really mean anything. Amazon may just have been serving this up because someone else in the family was searching for this. Who knows? Maybe Bryan's sisters were eagerly searching for K-bar knives. So if someone else was searching it, then maybe it just served it up to him, not knowing, not distinguishing between his search and their search. And also, it could just be that this was something he'd purchased in the past and they just threw it out there. So it doesn't necessarily mean Bryan Kohberger was looking for it. Amazon's AI-driven ad placements, keyword targeting, and personalized recommendations actively guide users towards specific products. Amazon specializes in driving suggestions that are not actively searched for by a purchaser. In this case, the state's refining or limiting the Amazon click activity to a specific click or a specific item excludes data, takes things out of context, and can tell a completely inaccurate story to cause a jury to speculate about intent. So they're saying, look, when you show the jury these searches, the jury is going to have something in mind. The jury is going to think Bryan Kohberger sat at a keyboard and typed in K-bar knife. And that the reason he did that was he was trying to replace the knife he had disposed of because it had been used to murder 4 people. And he didn't want to be caught with that knife. But in this particular case, they're saying it might be that Amazon is suggesting this. It might have nothing to do with Bryan Kohberger. He might never have typed in K-bar knife. He might not ever have actually done that. And so the fact that Amazon threw this in there means this evidence does not have as much impact, and the jury may be confused. Amazon's sponsored products and display ads allow sellers to pay for visibility, meaning that if someone searched for binoculars, camping gear, or outdoor equipment, they could have been ad targeted with a gun or bear spray listing, not because they were looking for these items, but because an advertiser paid for it to appear. So they're saying all of these things are specifically related, are things that the jury could misunderstand and misinterpret. These could have come from Amazon, not from Bryan Kohberger, and not from his desire to replace the knife. It might have been an ad. It might have been someone else in the family. It could have been something suggested by Amazon and not related to him. For all of those reasons, they argue that it's something different. All right, let's pull that out and talk for just a minute about what this means. I'm going to be scooting back up in my notes since we missed a little bit there with the sound. So we will be talking about that. If you're watching this late enough, hopefully we will be able to cut all that out, and so you won't have to bother with it. We did lose sound for just a little bit. All right, so let's talk about what exactly the defense is arguing. I'm trying to find the exact spot in my notes since I'm now moving backwards in my notes. Just a question for those of you who are still, did we talk about the aggravating factors on the death penalty? If someone could throw that in there, I want to make sure to add that if for some reason we didn't. So that they are arguing that, maybe Kohberger's sisters were searching for K-bar knives, and this popped up on his feed because Amazon figured, he would be interested in that just like his sisters were. Maybe it wasn't Bryan Kohberger who searched for it. So I have a couple of problems that I think are created by that. The first thing is, to me, that is not my experience with Amazon. If my husband ordered pants, I didn't suddenly receive, an ad for men's pants on my feed. It was tailored to me and to my searches. So I'm curious, is that how it's been for you? I mean, if my daughter orders a textbook, I don't suddenly get a bunch of ads for textbooks. It is specific to me. So I'm not sure that it really fits with what I've experienced, but I'm curious, is that what you've experienced? Do you get just information for you, or does everybody in the family get put on your account? So let me know about that. Kohberger's argument also to me seems to be putting blame on Amazon. But I don't think that really explains the timing. It definitely is true that Amazon tempts you, but it tempts you with things that you want. It thinks I want to buy women's clothing, so it's going to show me pictures of shirts or things that I might like to buy. But why would it suddenly drop K-bar knives into your feed at the time of the murder? How would it know that exact timing? So one argument Kohberger might have is that it never stopped showing him K-bar knives. It had shown him that for 9 solid months. And since the state only asked for a limited amount of time, maybe they missed that. But I'm guessing that the state's expert, and they've argued it's not even really an expert, it's just a fact witness, but I'm guessing that they are probably going to bring someone from Amazon, they have the name already even, and that person is going to say that there was actually the entry of a search by Kohberger, but we don't have all the detail that we'll have when the person actually ends up testifying. So I'm looking to see. Well, I don't know. I guess hopefully we talked about the aggravating factor, but I'm not seeing anybody putting that in. Everybody's like, what are you talking about, Lee? What aggravating factor? I hope I did talk about that. All right. So the arguments that the defense is making to keep this out is that this is incomplete evidence. And they cite something called Rule 106, which says if a party introduces all or part of a writing or recorded statement, an adverse party may require the introduction at that time of any other part or any other writing or recorded statement that in fairness ought to be considered at the same time. So we'll go ahead and let me switch over to the defense motion. I really am all over this document. Here we go. And I will add this to the stage so you can see it too. All right. So this is Rule 106. And the idea is if you are going to show the jury this much, that may not be fair. You may need to show them this much in order for it to be fair, because you may give them the wrong impression if you just show them part of what the truth is. You have to show them the whole amount of the whole truth, not just a little piece of it. So in this particular case, the defense is saying, we want you to put in all of the Amazon data, not just the searches for knives, not just the K-bar, because you would see then that Bryan Kohberger is, also looking for, I don't know, something nice like, Bibles and Mother's Day gifts, something like that, something very nice. And so the argument that the defense is making is this is incomplete. You need to put in all of the information. And the state is going to say, yeah, that's too much. That's going to overwhelm the jury. It's going to bore the jury. And that's more than we need. Also, they're going to argue that right there, as you can see, that what they're talking about here is all are part of a writing or recorded statement. And they're saying, look, documents from Amazon about what your searches are, that's not a statement from anybody. This is just business records. You don't have to put in all the business records just because you put in some. So that's what they're going to argue. The judge will be ruling on this, and we'll find out more about what they do. All it would mean is not that it would keep the evidence out, but that more would come in, so it might get lost in the big amount that would be dumped on the jury. It might be harder for them to see through it. I think that's a pretty creative argument. I don't think it's very likely that the defense is going to win on this. Let's take a look at number 6 and 7 over here. This is what the defense is arguing. They're saying that a statement is defined as an oral assertion, written assertion, or nonverbal conduct if the person intended it as an assertion. They're saying Amazon records are not a statement. And user activity from a business does not fall under the purview of Rule 106. So they're saying this isn't really going to count. In this particular case, I do think it's a creative argument, but I don't think the state is very likely to win on this. I don't think the defense is very likely to win on this. Clearly, the original purchase of the knife is just relevant. It's almost surely going to come in. As for the searches for another knife right around the time of the crime, that's going to depend on a few things. Like if he bought it, that's relevant. That's pretty easy. But it sounds like he never bought a new replacement knife. He just searched for one. But the state still has a pretty good argument that this shows intent. It shows planning, and it's relevant to the question of first-degree murder and to the charges against him. But there is something about this that I think is really helpful to the defense. I don't know that anyone's really talking about this yet, but I think the defense has a pretty good argument, because this suggests, without giving us details, that Kohberger started searching for a K-bar knife before the murders. And if that's the case, because they went all the way back early in November before the murders to get Amazon data. Now, it could be the Amazon data shows absolutely no searches, day of the murder, next day searches for knives. That would be pretty important if that's true. But if he'd been searching for a while, even beforehand, then the state is going to say, well, yeah, of course he did that. He did that because he was planning the murders. He knew he was going to have to dispose of this knife. But the defense is going to say he searched for a new knife. His first knife was already gone, and maybe he sold it, maybe it was stolen, whatever reason. But it proves that this knife wasn't in his possession. Why would he have been searching for a new one? Obviously, something happened to the first knife, and that could be explained by a third-party culprit who planted this at the scene. And we've been told, hence, that the defense is going to argue this knife sheath was planted, that Bryan Kohberger is not the person who put it there. It may have had his DNA on it, but somebody else put it there, and they did it to frame Kohberger. So now they are trying, alternatively, if they can't get it out entirely, they would like to bury the evidence, as I said, in sort of a big data dump, a lot of searches to make it kind of overwhelming and complex. So, but when we get to the question of whether or not the knife sheath was planted, there are going to be a lot of questions that come up around that, like who planted it and why. The defense is going to have to give some answers to that. It's going to be hard to do without Kohberger getting on the stand. So the next piece of evidence that I want to talk about that's new information to us is the DNA under Madison Mogen's fingernails. Now, according to what we've been told, I'm going to add this back to the stage and switch over to the document. According to what we've been told, this was a mixture of 3 different DNA mixes. And we do not know who exactly those 3 people were. Not definitively Bryan Kohberger, and that's pretty important. It says that Jade Miller will testify as to the results of testing done on the fingernail clippings from Maddie Mogen. And it's a 3-person mixture, or she believed it was. And the data showed, and there's so much redacted here, it's really frustrating. We have to kind of guess what exactly is being said. Miller testified that MM as followed, all blacked out. The data from that sample, so we're going to switch over to the state, gave us a little bit more information. So we'll switch to that in just a second. But what we can tell is that it says the data from that sample was blank as to Mr. Kohberger. It's blacked out, redacted. Miller testified that inconclusive means that an analyst is something. So I'm guessing it must say that the data from that sample was inconclusive as to Mr. Kohberger. And Miller went on to explain that the likelihood ratio for Mr. Kohberger, blacked out, we don't know what. Here, expanding beyond the language of the report would prejudice Mr. Kohberger in that it might allow the jury to infer that the inconclusive data would mean that he might be included. So essentially what this whole argument is about, what this brief is about, is the defense, you can see it's called at the top, motion in limine number 5, re inconclusive data. And they're saying, if you let somebody come in and say, well, we looked at the DNA under the fingernails and it's inconclusive as to whether Kohberger is the person whose DNA it was. They're saying, look, that's not, the defense is saying we're believers in the glass is half empty, that the jury is likely to say, well, or that, it's not necessarily Bryan Kohberger, but it could be. So we're going to run with it could be. And they're saying that's not really fair, because it's also true that it could not be. And that's something that the jury ought to be told. So we should just leave out this inconclusive data. It's going to be confusing. So we got a little more specific information from the state. It's also redacted, but let's take a look at what it says here. I'll make that a little bigger for everybody. Ms. Miller concluded that it is inconclusive whether the following persons are potential contributors to item 13.1: Jack Ducour, Cole Berenberg, Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, and Bethany Funk. Bethany Funk was the roommate down on the first floor. Xana, one of the girls killed Ethan, her boyfriend. Cole Berenberg, I don't know. Jack Ducour, I believe, was the ex-boyfriend of Kaylee. And apparently they were still very close. They owned a dog together, in fact. She also determined it is inconclusive whether Bryan Kohberger is a potential contributor to item 13.1. But take a look at the numbers, because what we were told in the prior motion from the defense is anything over 100 means that, yes, that's a match. It's that person's DNA. Anything that's under 0.001, nope, that's not a match. Anything in between is inconclusive. But take a look. The Bryan Kohberger is really pretty small. It may be bigger than some, but it's smaller than Cole Berenberg or Jack Ducour. It's 0.0469. That's really pretty small. I am not sure why the defense is fighting this so hard. I think they could come in and argue 0.0469. Wow, that's really not a very high chance. Is it, jury? It seems to me like they could argue that. But they keep going. They say the defense has disclosed Jennifer Bracamontes, a casework manager at Cybergenetics, as an expert witness. She utilized a different program to analyze the DNA profile. I'm skipping around. She determined that Bryan Kohberger could be excluded from the DNA profile. So they've got two things going here. for the defense. First, a very low number and lots of other people who also cannot be excluded. And then secondly, an expert witness hired by the defense who is going to come in and say, yeah, it's not Bryan Kohberger. I don't know why the state's people couldn't see that, but I can definitively tell you it's not Bryan Kohberger. It seems to me like they have some pretty good arguments on this one. I'm surprised that they're pushing to keep this out, but in any event, they are. So let me need to thank a few people. R. Matt says member lives are a blast. Thank you. Lots of laughs. They are really fun. And I appreciate that, R. Mac. If you're not a member, it's easy to become a member. We have some gifted memberships. Our mods will tell you how you might get lucky and win one from YouTube, from the gifts that people have given through YouTube. And otherwise, you can join with the little join button by the name of the channel at the bottom. It's a huge help to me as I do these on a regular basis, but I would appreciate it. Mama Pinks is saying that Tarn's birthday is tomorrow. Happy birthday. Shiro Sheena, Heather R, Tarn, all KS, everybody giving me lots of warning that I was muted. It still took me a while. I'm very lucky that y'all are patient with my glitches. Thank you very, very much. Gretchen Uro says it's even better. Good to see me, even better to hear me. So I will keep going through those in just a minute. Let's go ahead and switch back over and keep going through our evidence and our discussion about the evidence. So it's a little hard to follow this with the redactions, and it's possible that we're missing something. We're kind of doing the best we can, piecing it together, knowing that we're missing parts that they have blocked out for us that we can't see. But it does seem to me like some of this is helpful to Kohberger. I'm kind of surprised that he's keeping this out because it doesn't seem to be really definitive in any way that it's Bryan Kohberger. But I think the defense, as I said, is concerned that any hint that Bryan Kohberger was there is a problem. In general, it's very likely the judge is going to let all of this in and say this is all about cross-examination. Feel free to come in and say to the expert for the state, isn't it true the number's really tiny? Isn't it true that our expert says you can tell for sure it's not Kohberger? Isn't it true that you can't say it is Kohberger? You can do all that in cross-examination, and you do not necessarily have to do that by keeping it out, and we're not going to keep it out. That's my guess about what the court will do. So the last piece of evidence I want to talk about is the selfie, because that is a super interesting. I'm going to remove this. Give me just a second. And so let's talk about that selfie for just a minute, and I will put it back in the screen. Let me get it queued up for you. And I find it really interesting because I think that the way you view this selfie is very much going to depend on whether or not you are inclined to believe that Bryan Kohberger committed this crime, or whether you're inclined to believe that Bryan Kohberger did not commit it. Now, this was taken at 10:31 a.m. the morning after the murders. So the 4 college students were killed between about 4 and 4:30, according to what the state believes. This is about 6 hours later. So according to the state, Bryan Kohberger has driven around. He's back home and he's in the bathroom. Looks like he's taken a shower, and he looks like he's, fresh out of the shower and all dressed and giving a thumbs up. So if you believe Bryan Kohberger is innocent, then this is just a picture of a nice young man. It's a Sunday morning. Maybe he's even on his way to church, sends this to mom to say, you know what? I really am going to church. Told you I would. And if you think Kohberger is guilty, then this is a very disturbing photograph of a psychopath who just murdered 4 students, strangers, in cold blood. And he's cleaned all the blood off, and his shower curtain is right behind him. We'll talk about that in a minute. And he's giving himself a thumbs up because he is so proud to have gotten away with killing 4 people. 2 wildly different views of this one picture. So one thing we've heard is that the state may say this shower curtain that you see there wasn't in the house, in the apartment when we searched it. But I don't think that's a very good evidence because he had apparently been kicked out of school. He wasn't going to be allowed to go back, and he was moving across the country back to Pennsylvania. So at least I think he may have been. So you probably would throw out your shower curtain or even take it with you, but probably just throw it out if you were going to be moving across the country. So I don't know that that's that important. But the way you view this is going to be really different. And I am curious, how do you see it? Do you see this as creepy selfie, or do you see it as nice guy headed out to church? Let me know in the chat. What is it that you are thinking? The reason that the state says they want this in is not just creepy photo, thumbs up 6 hours after the murders. They're saying that there are all these references. There's a witness who will say that the person she saw in the home had bushy eyebrows. And this shows Bryan Kohberger's eyebrows were bushy at the time. Here, I'll add it back real quick so you can see what I mean. So it's that his eyebrows were bushy at or near the time of the crime, and that's the reason to put it in. Now, the defense has moved to keep all references to bushy eyebrows out. That is wildly overbroad. We're going to cover that in detail another day. It's really an interesting argument. But the state says, no, we can get this photograph in because it shows the condition of his eyebrows at the time and that this witness would have been correct. So obviously, though, the selfie has other overtones, ways that you're going to see it depending on what your belief about what's happened is. All right. So, and if you would go ahead and put some question marks at the beginning of your question, if you want to ask a question in the chat, and I'll be answering a few. And in the meantime, let me take a look over here. And there are a few people I'll thank as we're going through it. So I'll Be Your Mirror Too says that they cannot see buying for the family, but Amazon will suggest items to me that they have searched for. Okay, so that's interesting. So there is crossover. Maybe it's because we have our own separate accounts or something that I don't really see that. But that's interesting. I've been wondering about that. Canonis Baloney says, thanks for your great analysis. And I'm sure Canoni is a reference to the judge in the Karen Reed case. There's a big hearing in that tomorrow. So I'll be following that. Look forward to talking with you about that. Mama Pink says tomorrow too. Happy birthday, Catherine. Wow, Catherine, we have lots of birthdays. Happy birthday to all of you. That's very exciting. And Annie, I appreciate the super sticker. Thank you very much. And Mama Pink, thank you for all those birthday shout outs. Thanks for doing that. All right, let's head over and see if there were some questions that people had. All right, here's Cindy saying, has it been noted that his eyebrows have been trimmed? They appear more bushy in the selfie than he looks in court. Definitely. I mean, I would think most attorneys would say keep those eyebrows trimmed, but that may be one of the reasons they say the state says we want to put this photograph in because we can't count on how you show up at trial as showing the jury what it really would have looked like. Annie K, the defense has brow-scaped BK since the crime. Isn't that obvious? So it may well be. They may have given him some means of getting rid of the bushy eyebrows, and maybe it's changed. I'll have to get a picture. I haven't really compared the two, and that is kind of an important point. So when we cover the brow argument and the brow motion in limine, which is really amazing, a whole motion in limine on that, but we'll look at pictures of what he looks like today and what he looked like in that selfie that you just saw. And we'll talk about whether or not that means it's going to be more likely that the state is going to get that picture in. And I think they probably are. Liz Ann says that the defendant would be interested to know his frequency on, that one of the questions that she would be interested in knowing about is, did Bryan Kohberger take selfies every morning at 10:31 or every Sunday at 10:31 or every time he put on a dress shirt? I don't know. All interesting questions, and they have all that, although that might be a little broader than the judge will let them get in. Depending on what they find, it might be a little too broad. Maria Z asking about Dad. He's doing much better. We are definitely going to do our broadcast on advice from a 90-year-old, but he's not quite back to normal yet. So we'll save that for when he is feeling a little bit better. I see comments about how anemic and pale he looks. I have to agree with that. He looks really, really pale, but that could be the lighting. It's hard to tell without knowing. It might not be anything related to what has just happened, or then again, it might be. Who knows? Jay Ray does not believe it's creepy. And I think we'll have people mixed on that. I really do. I think some people will, if your view is Kohberger is guilty, you're probably going to see it as really creepy. And if your view is, I haven't seen it yet, he could be innocent, less so. Chris saying he didn't order another one from the company because he didn't want it tracked. Well, that would certainly have been a wise choice, because if he really lost it, he could have. I worked there. Oh, okay. So that's interesting. Chris is saying you could reorder and if you lost it. Bon Bon is asking, how can an overconfident criminology PhD candidate be so sloppy and clueless he should know about DNA and tracing Amazon purchases? That's been a question throughout this, Bon Bon, is why was he not a little cleverer, more clever? Why didn't he think through some of these things, like his cell phone? He did in some senses. It was turned off at least part of the time. But, his car was spotted. There were things that he did, like he didn't rent a car or something like that. Not that we're trying to give a roadmap for other people, but there were just a lot of mistakes that he made, which you would not anticipate someone in his position with his training and background to have made. So it is a lot of questions around that. All right. Sweet Tea had a birthday yesterday. Happy birthday, Sweet Tea. Kathy Smith, what if he was looking for a replacement knife to commit another red rum? Indeed, that is a really terrifying thought. Think about the state's best argument. The state's best argument is 9 months before he decided he was going to kill somebody somewhere sometime. Hadn't even figured out who yet, maybe. But he decided that, kept this knife, moved from across the country and found just the occasion and put that into motion, and then was buying another knife because he wanted to keep going. That's why it would be such dangerous evidence on the issue of the death penalty, because I think it does fit with that aggravating factor, which hopefully was not part of the part where it was muted. Hopefully you were able to hear that, but the aggravating factor here, we'll search in here for it, was the defendant, by his conduct, whether such conduct was before, during, or after the commission of murder at hand. So searches after we count. Has exhibited a propensity to commit murder, which will probably constitute a continuing threat to society. So the best case for the state is this guy not only killed 4 people and planned it well in advance, but he planned to keep going. The defense is going to say nonsense. The guy like knives, so do tons and tons of people. And he only searched for this again because he already bought one. He liked them. He thought they were interesting, checking price. I don't know. He wanted to go camping, whatever. Amazon threw it at him, so he looked at it. It wasn't that he was trying to search it again. So those are going to be 2 really starkly different views of Bryan Kohberger that are going to be presented at trial. That's what I would expect. Excuse me. I'm looking for question marks at the beginning because otherwise it's real hard to spot these. So Tina Lucille wants to know if it's possible he was on a Snapchat call since he has earbuds in. That was really confusing. I keep popping this back up, but let's do it. He does seem to have some kind of earbuds or something in his ears. At first, I thought they looked like the curls that you see with Hasidic Jews might have the curl down, but I think that he's wearing earpieces. I think that's what he's doing. And it is really, was he on a Snapchat call? I don't know. Co-conspirator, she suggests, Tina does. I don't know. But he does seem to have something in his ears. I agree with you on that. Not today. If they shared an account, how would Amazon know who bought what? There's an interesting question. I don't have an answer for that. Not today. It does seem like it would be hard for the state to say Bryan Kohberger bought the K-bar knife. Maybe it was his credit card. Maybe that's how they know. But because they did ask for credit card and payment information. So maybe that's the way it happened. All right. So looking for question marks at the beginning, but I see Maynard has a question mark at the end. We'll count that. I may not spot it all the time. Oh, Andrea before that. Oh, with all his brains, why would he look up the knife on Amazon? Seems too easy. I don't know. Maybe he didn't think through the Amazon searches or yeah, I don't know. The defense says he didn't. The defense says Amazon just served this up. It's nothing that happened to him. So, Andrea, that will be an argument the defense will make at trial. Maynard, where is evidence that the knife was given to anyone identifiable? Where is proof or evidence of that knife having been received as a gift? Not necessarily a gift. I think the implication is he bought it himself, maybe credit card, but that according to what we are getting from this motion by the state, there was a purchase of this knife by Bryan Kohberger. Now, we will find out whether or not some of the searches were actually done by Bryan Kohberger. Maybe they were prompted by Amazon. We don't know what data Amazon kept, but the defense is saying it's not enough to take a look at what Bryan Kohberger searched, because that's going to be all mixed in with what Amazon served up. It's not going to necessarily be accurate. Okay, so we are looking for question mark. Do you think there's enough evidence to convict? Lorelei Annie asked me. Lorelei Annie. I think it's way too early to tell. I don't think we have any idea yet. We are just for the first time getting some more dribbles out about evidence. For a long time, all we had was that initial statement by Brett Payne, and pretty much nothing else. Everything just about was put under seal, redacted, kept from us. But now the newest judge is allowing this information to come out. So I think that we are finally going to be getting more, but we won't know until trial. I think it'd be too early to say that. Lori S. wants to know, do you think his family helped the authorities? Why does the state say they have witnesses that saw him with the knife as well as Amazon receipts? I don't know about the witnesses that saw him with the knife. Interesting. I don't remember reading that, but that would be super important, right? Maybe that would explain how they knew to limit their request to Amazon to a 10-day period around the time that he first bought the knife, because I find that mystifying how they would know about that. So I think we'll find out much more about that when trial comes around, and maybe even before then. All right, we will take, I'm looking for question marks at the beginning. Oh, wait, I just missed one. This is from Wheeler saying, have we seen anything saying the wounds were actually made by a K-bar? That they leave a pretty distinctive hole? I don't know. I think we know from the initial statement by Brett Payne, I think it said a sharp instrument, but I don't know how specific they were about exactly what made that. So I don't know for sure. All right. Well, we will be going live again almost surely tomorrow night. I think we're going to be talking about Karen Reed. We normally go Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, and for sure we'll be doing that, but I think we'll go again tomorrow to talk about the hearing that'll happen tomorrow in the Karen Reed case. And I will see you then. Well, okay, there we go. Can you hear that? Okay.